Yeah, so I work at the Forest and Rangeland Ecosystem Science Center, and all of the tools that were just introduced there, actually, each one of them use LANDFIRE data in a different way. So our office uses LANDFIRE data quite a lot. And what I'm showing today is probably the biggest use case that we use, and also the most public facing and obvious use case of LANDFIRE data in one of our applications. So I just have a few slides to show to kind of set up the paradigm, and then I was just going to show you how we're using it in our website, and then talk through some of the infrastructure that we've had to build because of the way LANDFIRE is currently hosted. So the land treatment exploration tool is what I'm going to be showing you a piece of today, and it's a public website that was built for the BLM mainly, but anyone can access the tool. And essentially it helps you identify characteristics of an area of interest. And for the BLM, that's typically a planned treatment site. So for example, an area burns and they need to stabilize that landscape with drill seeding or herbicide, some type of restoration action. So that's their area of interest. And what this tool does is it helps you identify the context of the landscape, such as past treatments, fire history, drought, past and future. It creates a bunch of maps and summaries and a nice little, there's 2 reports that it creates that help with the planning process to help justify what you're hoping to do, and then communicate that up through the ranks. So whether you're trying to talk to, you know, your stakeholder neighbors or your boss, someone you need funding for, it's just kind of a nice little report that packages up a lot of information about an area of interest. And the information from LANDFIRE that we use are these ones. So we use the potential vegetation type, so ecological site potential, existing vegetation cover, existing vegetation type, elevation, and slope. Elevation and slope are 2 of the newer ones, I guess, that we've brought in, but we've pretty much always used those top 3 since the beginning of this website. And it was first released in 2020, but we started development in 2017, first kind of real thing in 2018. So since that time, LANDFIRE has gone through a lot of changes in the way they classically would release data, and also the technology of data serving has changed quite a bit. So we've had to kind of evolve a bit as the way that we access these data, and as well as which data version has also evolved. Oops, sorry. So we use LANDFIRE data in 2 ways. This is just a screenshot of the tool. One way is simply to display the data. So we have an area of the tool where someone can just toggle on. There's over 70 different data layers that we pull in that people can turn on and interact with at different steps of the tool. And I wanted to show you this one as the example to start thinking about why we had to serve these layers ourselves versus use the existing LANDFIRE services that are hosted by LANDFIRE. So the existing vegetation cover layer used to look like this in the public data. The last time I checked, this is not actually how the legend and everything would interact with the data. So herbaceous cover 55% here, but the legend you'll see it's binned with values and vegetation type. So there's a mismatch between the legend and what's actually saved in that pixel value, which is important for when you start summarizing this data for a specific area of interest. So this is just a quick screen capture of a page of one of the reports that gets generated. And for several different data layers, for an area of interest, this is an example wildfire. We have this little chunk of information about those layers where we give a brief introduction of the data layer, the source, and we have a thumbnail map that displays a web service. We have a legend that is what that map is showing you. And then the table is showing a summary of what's actually within that fire polygon. So we have a geoprocessing service that overlays this boundary with the LANDFIRE data and then serves up a table. So that table of data needs to be structured kind of in the same way as the data are displayed. So right now, all of this is hosted in Cloud Hosting Solutions, Amazon Web Services. So these are all on cloud servers. So we have an ArcGIS server that we host custom data services on. And that's important because we are actually not using the standard LANDFIRE mapping service intentionally right now. And I can talk about why. And it also, so beyond mapping services, we also host geoprocessing services that does the heavy lifting of the tool. So to create that summary table, there has to be a service behind it. And then we also have a separate server that hosts the data. So in order for that geoprocessing service to calculate that summary table, the data need to be accessible and preferably nearby the ArcGIS server so that the processing is really fast. So having the data next to the service makes it fast. So we have a copy of the data on this cloud server that the geoprocessing service can hit and then calculate that nice summary table very quickly. So the reason why we have our own server is because for whatever reason, each update of LANDFIRE the order of layers changed. So when we were referencing from the service 1 or 4, that index pointed to a different layer each update of LANDFIRE. And we also didn't know when those updates were happening. So all of a sudden you would turn on like EVT and it would be elevation or something because the indexes kept changing with each release. So that's one frustration. And that causes a mismatch between like what you're expecting and what's actually being shown. In addition to that, when data update and we don't know that they update, that means that the map is different than the summary table because the summary table is being derived from that file server, right? The data need to be close to the service. And so the summary table might be working off an older version than what the map is displaying. So to keep that versioning consistent, we have, and to make sure that the layer is drawing what we expect it to draw, we have our own service that we keep track of and use to display. Another reason we do it that way is for one of the most recent versions of ecological or EVC, the cover, the legend and the pixel values changed. And so the public service didn't match how the summary table would display data. So to get all that to jive, we're just hosting our own of those mapping services.
Can I ask you a clarifying question, Michelle?
Absolutely.
Sorry. I think other people might be wondering this, and maybe it's just me, but so is what you're saying is you guys, in order to grab LANDFIRE data, you're grabbing as much as you can, and then you're hosting it on your own streaming service to integrate with the tool. You're not streaming directly from LANDFIRE.
Yeah, so these ones here, we used to. So in 2018, 19, 2020, and maybe even 2021, we were pulling the services, the mapping portion, not the summary table, but the mapping portion when you turn on a layer like in here. This was coming directly from LANDFIRE. However, as updates started coming out, it caused all kinds of problems because the indexing would change and we didn't know when updates were happening and things would all of a sudden a service would go away or it would change. And so some services are like static, like provisional seed zones, like that one doesn't change. Or ecological site name, like heat load, some of those ones, they're just like a published, it's a versioned release of data. Whereas the LANDFIRE service was like ever evolving. And so when a new data layer would come out, it would replace the existing service or the other service would disappear and this new service would be and the indexing would change. So it's not just like a LANDFIRE problem. We deal with these kind of pains with some other data sources as well. And then my last point on here was that the data will always return because we are the ones housing it. There have been times in the past when the LANDFIRE servers weren't working, and that happens to us too. Sometimes our servers, like an update gets stuck and it's like we need to like kick the server, but we have control over it. Whereas if we have data that are critical for our report not returning, that's a problem. So for the subset of data layers that we actually report in our PDF on, we host all that data so that we know that it will return when if the website is working, those will return. It's less of a problem with LANDFIRE. So ScienceBase is another big repository of data that USGS uses, and it's constantly breaking and like there's always issues. So like none of the stuff that we don't really like use ScienceBase intentionally for really important data because I don't like to rely on that for the important data. So let's just see what that looks like. And then I hope there will be quite a bit of discussion. So I have it pulled up, sorry, here. And so I don't want to like teach you all about the tool because that's not the point of this today, but to show you a few pieces that those screen captures were taken from. So part of the tool, we have this map, and you can go through and turn these on and interact with the data. So again, this looks like the LANDFIRE service, but really it's being drawn from our service that we're hosting because it is integral to the report. Not all of these data layers are integral to the report. We don't host all of these, and some of them are, like I said, they don't like change ever, and so it's fine. Like we don't host that many layers, but LANDFIRE is one of them because they change a lot. So that's one place that we use them, and that's just using a web mapping service hosted on our ArcGIS server. And then the other place, I can hit this again so you can see it happen. So I just ran through this to, you always want to make sure when you're doing a demo that things are working. So I ran this right before the call, but I'll hit this again. So at this step in the tool, it uses, so this is a wildfire boundary that I uploaded. And what this step is going to do is it's going to take this wildfire boundary and overlay it with a geoprocessing service on our ArcGIS server to calculate a bunch of data. So just so you can see the speed of that. So things start popping in right away. So what happened here is there's an API that sends this shape to our geoprocessing service. That geoprocessing service is next to the data. So we have a copy of all these data layers next to our geoprocessing service. So it's not pinging the LANDFIRE website, it's pinging our file server, so that it's really fast and interactive. Because a website, you know, people have attention spans that are not always very long. So we want to make sure that it's like super fast and it is reliable as well. Because we have control over it. Not that our servers are any better than anyone else's. It's just I know when it's broken and I can do something about it myself. And then, so there's a bunch of different data in here, but those LANDFIRE layers are in here. Let's see. So we have elevation. Here's EVT, EVC, biophysical setting. Those ones there. And then there's other things that happen in the tool, but to show you what that PDF, oh, it's still running. This is what it will look like. It's still calculating some data. This is the PDF that it builds. So this is the screen capture example. Scroll down to a LANDFIRE example. Okay. So here's what that looks like in the PDF. So just like that screenshot. So we have the thumbnail, the legend, the table for some of the LANDFIRE data layers. So EVC, having these groupings match what the pixels really are was important so that the map and the table and the legend So we had to kind of configure that ourselves on, I think, the latest release of EVC. I think that was the big pushing point for us to be like, okay, we have to host these ourselves because they're changing how they're out there. So yeah, we don't love hosting lots of data because then we have to host data, but in this case we had to, and I don't know, maybe in the future, if indexing doesn't change and if the symbology formatting stays consistent, like the type of pixels, then we'd be happy to just use the authoritative service instead. But yeah, so that's kind of what that looks like. And let me I'm in the conference room, and so I'm going to put you on that projector so I can see if there are any people with questions in the chat or anything. But that's kind of where I wanted to leave it. And there's lots of conversations that I could start having with you guys, but I don't know the audience. So maybe just let me know what you guys would like to talk about.
I have a question. If you scroll down on this screen, it looked like there was the sage grouse. My husband's a sage grouse biologist, so it gets me curious. Where does all the sage grouse data come from? Where are you pulling that in from?
Yeah, so for any of the data layers, there's like this about tab right here. And if I open this up, we have all of our data sources here. So we link to the authoritative data. So if you're curious about that, it's also in the report. It has the link to it in the PDF. But depending on which layer you're referring to, it might be coming from somewhere else.
And so the report, it looked like I was multitasking, but the report spits out a PDF and just by automatically, did you push a button somewhere in the tool that spit out the report?
Yeah, it was still calculating the one last, now it's done. So if I hit preview report,
okay, perfect.
Because I couldn't do this, it was calculating remote sensing, like a RC map still, and that takes a little while. So when I hit preview report, it's going to start populating this, and this step can be really tricky as it's being right now because these maps aren't populating, and I'm suspicious. Okay. This is probably the firewall. So if you do anything with IT or any thing in the government, they've been changing firewalls a lot. And I'm guessing we constantly have firewall issues with these maps. But I should have tested this part this morning. This is what built, once this would have been done, these would have been thumbnails. I'm not sure what's going on. I'm guessing it's the firewall.
But I mean,
then it comes up with a print button and you print this.
I think anybody that runs apps like this can totally relate. So no worries on that. I did realize your alt text is like in there if you hover over where the thumbnail would be, which I'm very impressed with. Jenna had a question. Feel free to unmute yourself and turn your camera on if you want, but I can read it. Even if the indexing and other issues were addressed, do you think you would end up hosting data anyway due to performance?
We could for the mapping, but we would still have to probably the version of the data. So one issue, and I hit on this a little bit, is if LANDFIRE does an update, they don't change the symbology, they don't change the layer indexing, but the data themselves change. And if I just probably need to get on the right mailing list, I need to know ahead of time that the data are changing so that I can have that version of data for the geoprocessing service so that the map and the data that it summarizes are the same version of data, because we don't want to mismatch version. But we do that with some layers that have a less frequent update cycle. We certainly will replace the service and the data at the same time so that we're still using their service, but we know when it's changing. So we could, but we'd still have to have a copy of the data, just not the map service.
Makes sense. Henry, feel free to unmute yourself and turn your camera on and ask a question.
Sure. So good coverage so far, Michelle. It's always good to get updates from you. And I'm going to build off of, Jenna's comment, because that was the reason I raised my hand as well. Is I know there's workload as well as costs associated with us, hosting data and working with data in multiple places. So again, it, as you probably can appreciate, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so inefficient. We need to think of how we can do a better job of coordinating, because this just boggles my mind. You're in USGS. LANDFIRE is currently hosted in USGS. And so even within the same agency, this is happening. Right? If it was outside the agency, well, then there might be some other things. But I would really like to have some conversations probably with you and the rest of the team to figure out, all right, what can we do to set up a structure so that we can better coordinate and make sure that we're talking together like we need to, because otherwise I could see what you're doing here being replicated across a number of different places. And you're not the only one. I'll go back to the Forest Service and the Wildland Fire Management RDNA. They used to do the same thing. They hosted the data for WFDS because they needed a copy there, and it was just much more efficient to run the analyses and all that kind of stuff. Well, there's costs associated with all that. So we are making a change to move to services, but all the points that you're raising are points that definitely need to be coordinated so things don't get broken, So I would welcome the opportunity to, figure out how do we do that better coordination.
So I will say we are trying to figure out a similar problem. So the RCMap group, they're based out of Eros over in South Dakota. And this is a task that the tool also does, where it takes that polygon, sends it to a service, and it calculates the annual fractional component data for that fire polygon on the fly. And we were running into issues of the same sort of things. Like, what we can't hold, this is like terabytes of data to have all of these rasters for all of these components. So we were, okay, let's point it to their data on their server, because they have them as COGS, cloud optimized geotiffs, which are pretty fast for geoprocessing. So that's removing the paradigm of having the data next to the service. But it was like just fast enough that it was okay. But we don't love it. And so what we are moving to is, and because lots of people, like you're saying, want to use these data and like I want to make this graph for my work, or RCMap wants this capability on their website. So what we did is we gave them the geoprocessing service, and we're in the process of Eros hosting the service that does this on their server next to the data. So essentially what happens is our website will go ping Eros. Eros does all the work, returns the data back, and then it looks the same on our end, but it's much faster because the geoprocessing was done by Eros next to the data, and it's all, neat and tidy, and it's authoritative location and everything, and we don't have duplication of things. So it's possible if LANDFIRE wanted to provide summary data services that gave you information like this, like have an API on LANDFIRE where it's like receive JSON, calculate summary, return JSON of this, just like return this information. And then a user could have that implemented in their R code or in their website or wherever. So I don't know if you guys are interested in doing that, but that is one way that we would not ever have to worry about the authoritative versioning and like display. It would just be, we're using your stuff, whatever it is. That does take the power out of our hands a little bit, which makes us like a little nervous because we need the data returned in a certain way. Or if it breaks and everyone's gone, like then it's broken. So there is like that growing pain a little bit, but I think it's okay as long as there's like a network of people and good communication. These are actually all calculated with the same service moving forward. Right now, these actually each have their own service, but moving forward, there's just like one geoprocessing service that accepts any kind of categorical raster. So all of these get sent to the same thing. So it's actually not like, it's not a complicated service. So if LANDFIRE wanted to host that and open it up, you wouldn't even have to make it public, but you could open it up to our URL if you weren't comfortable yet having it be public, because the more a service is used, the bigger its computer needs to be if you want it to like keep working for 100 people at once. There's lots of logistics to think about for that, but I would be very interested in learning more if you guys were interested in going down that route.
Well, Michelle, that's why we have folks like you to Office Hours, so you can give us that sort of direct feedback. And this is a decision that I think, the right people are on this call today. So you've been heard, and I think I really appreciate that feedback, and I know that they do as well. David Anderson was wondering, is there an API for this tool?
So to run through the whole process, no, but this whole thing is built off APIs. So if you're savvy, you can discover them. I'm not going to pull those up necessarily, but each one of these calls is an API call. We have an API call that goes to like a fish and wildlife tool, that's their API. We have a different API that goes to some like R servers that does some drought forecasting. So yeah, even a web mapping service is a type of API, but there's not a single API to just like, give me all this data. You'd have to run through it. But to get to this point, it takes about maybe 5 minutes. So if you're like willing to load a web page, you could look at it.
Go ahead, Inga.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to make sure that I understand what would be useful, I guess. So we have our sort of Esri image service, that we have, that you're saying it has changed, and we know that, right? Because we've been trying to upgrade it, to Arc Pro, and we've been trying to make sure that it's, kind of the latest and greatest that we can provide. So we have that, but we also have our own API, to request data for a certain area of interest. We don't have any kind of geoprocessing with that, other than just like editing classes. So it's a pretty simple one, right? So it's just basically like getting the data. And we're also in the process of sort of, thinking about how to make sure that that is able to handle a lot of requests from all over the place. Would that be helpful at all to just have the data? No.
I mean, we would still have to have our own geoprocessing service to then, it'd basically be like, here's a small version of the data to process, here's like
right
the clip of we'd still need to get to this point, right, where we have acres and percent area. Mm-hmm. So we would still have to have a service.
Right.
So, yeah. I mean, it's maybe a little intermediate, because then we're using your guys' data, but it's still not like the perfect solution.
Right. Okay, that's kind of what I was thinking. Sorry, I just wanted to confirm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so yeah, it's kind of sliding back into an old role that I used to have as a data manager and not fire planner. So my question is, that ArcGIS server has the ability to summarize based on a polygon. So you can send a polygon, an area of interest as JSON, and then get ArcGIS Online to summarize results against data sets that it hosts. And so it effectively kind of offloads the summarization to the hosting service rather than having you pull down all the data and then do summaries local. So is that something you've looked into using either AGOL, it works there, or just against ArcGIS server?
Yeah, so we're not using the USGS AGOL or This is all built off of our own instance of ArcGIS server. And we do use some of those built-in like things that you can tell it to do. This is not one of those things because there are several steps that need to happen to get to this point. It's not just like summarize this. You have to like check projections and like some of the stuff you can do. I never like to assume that data are going to be the right projection. So like there's always a project step and there's always, you have to do some like data manipulation ahead of time if it's multi-part, or sometimes you have to like simplify vertices. So it is like a series of things, a series of steps that need to happen to get to here. For some of these, it's a few steps. For something like this, it's actually like 12 or 20 different steps that need to happen before we get to like this one table. But we do use some of those existing things. For example, the print report actually, or not the print part, but the thumbnail maps, those are actually like a set thing that our ArcGIS server does that just like knows how to do. Or like to download these shapes, that's just a set thing that it just knows how to do. So we do use some of that like built-in infrastructure. And maybe I'm not understanding, but like I don't think it's capable of just automatically doing this level of summarization. But maybe I'm naive.
Okay. So it's kind of buried in the API, and Esri doesn't really they don't really advertise the capabilities of what you can do with the REST service is my experience. So there's work that you have to do on your side if you want the summaries to come out a certain way. You might actually have to make 3 queries against that and send different JSON each time, or I can you're USGS, so I can look you up and send you the work that we had done. We were mostly working against polygon data sets and attempting to pull out specific polygons in certain classes and then develop acreages and summarize on the fly. And rather than pull the whole data set in, we were working that kind of in a series of calls against ArcGIS Online. The beauty of that was that we didn't have to tax our own servers. We're sending pretty lightweight, just Polygon JSON and getting back a table. So it was pretty lightweight in terms of transaction.
Okay.
And the question we always had was, is Esri ever going to start charging us for the processing that's happening on ArcGIS server in the cloud? But so far, no.
Well, probably with this whole credit change.
Yeah. I'd be happy to send you kind of what I did. It may not meet your needs. It's pretty intensive looking work that you got going on to generate the report. But I'll look you up and send you an email on kind of what we were doing.
Yeah, any ideas like creative solutions around some of this would definitely be welcome. I mean, the reason why we, for the most part, are using the data next to our server is for speed and network. And those are related and also different because there's already so many like network calls and only so much the browser itself can handle as far as like information going back and forth. And so we like where you put the burden of like the calls. I guess you're saying the burden that would be on like AGOL. Yeah, I don't know. I'd be curious to see that workaround. Maybe it would be helpful in some ways. Are you working with raster data?
Most of ours was with Polygon, but I'm guessing with the image server, you could probably do the same thing against raster.
Rasters
but
are
I understand the difference, right?
Annoying.
Yeah. Well, they're more powerful, but also, they're different. They're different in the way you have to interact with them. And you've got things kind of categorized. So you're running into the same challenge that a lot of us are trying to kind of push this stuff into the new era. These are the kind of issues that we run into, and we revert back to, okay, I guess I'll make a copy, and then I'll try to figure out how to keep my copy in sync, and it's pain.
Hi, Michelle. Randy Swati here. I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand, so just jumping in. This is amazing. I really appreciate the kind of engineering behind this. It's really incredible. When we were getting on the call, you asked about how you're using LANDFIRE data. And I think it's amazing. For one, I really do appreciate how you're binning the existing vegetation cover data. I often do that too whenever I'm reporting out. And one small thing that we could contribute would be a CSV file of an accessible color palette by CSV file. Or I'm hoping the bins are the same. If you want to mess with that, I don't know what that would do behind the scenes at all, but we have some other color palettes we've worked up. I noticed that you have potential vegetation type, and if I remember right, your description of that was great. And it indicated that that was the LANDFIRE existing, environmental site potential data, and that represents what would be on the ground in the absence of disturbance for a long time or something like that. I liked your text there if I read that properly. One thing I was wondering was, would there also be value in serving up the biophysical settings data, which is a little bit different in that, just for the good of the order, in that data set, basically LANDFIRE very basically took the environmental site potential data that I believe you're using here, Michelle, and then ran disturbance on top of that, so that maybe a site would, an environmental site potential support an oak forest ecosystem. And the biophysical settings, it might be oak woodland because of naturally occurring fire would open up the canopy more. That's a super simple example, but that was one thing I wondered about, Michelle, would be adding that data in, but it might confuse users. But I don't know, you did a good job of describing the environmental site potential, I thought.
We actually, the first iteration, we actually had biophysical setting, and then we switched it to site potential. Yeah, we had a lot of conversations about which one we should use. We are always adding and removing like antiquated layers like at each version release, so it's not unheard of. If it's something that is important for restoration or when thinking about the context of a landscape, then it makes sense that we might be able to add it. And even if, let's say, we didn't think we should add it here because it might be just confusing to users, bare minimum, we could still add it to the map for people to turn on. We have tons of layers in the map that you can see that we don't display just because we can't have a report that's like 1,000 pages long. And that's like a ton of, you can't, that's just not feasible. But we could add it to display if nothing else, for sure.
Yeah, the reason I was thinking so, and I really appreciate, that there were probably a lot of conversations around this. So I can see both sides for sure. The thing I was thinking is, what if you could also serve up, and this is again leaning on your engineering expertise here, could you serve up the Word documents that describe the biophysical settings too, so that when somebody did their report and if they clicked biophysical setting, they would get the summary of that and then also get all the associated Word documents. And again, that's a versioning nightmare, I would think, but there are a bunch of Word documents, we have, gosh, over 1,000 or so.
So we do connect to the metadata. And so something we could do is have this metadata reference maybe in the report. So right now we just have the link to, the thing itself. But, we could say source and metadata, and then also include the metadata, which, we have to use something that is computer friendly. So like a Word document, not super machine readable, but XML or HTML, we can deal with for stuff like this.
Wow, incredible. Well, I'd love to talk to you more. I want to mention a couple of things, and definitely happy to give the floor over to other folks with questions. This is incredible, Michelle. Thank you for showing us.
Thanks. Well, I am always open to like new ideas, and like I'm always learning about what new data are coming out and what should be important. So happy to learn more about those.
What is your update frequency? Because LANDFIRE 2022 has been out, I guess, since November, December. And LANDFIRE 2023 will begin coming out in like next month. So, and we are kind of moving towards that annual release schedule. Yeah, how do you track that? And can we help, with notifications, or, how do you do that?
Yeah, so how we've handled data updates. Okay, so there's two ways we use the data, right? So in the mapping part, and you can just turn on layers in the map, and then there's the report.
Mm-hmm.
We are protecting ourselves against data changing in the report by having all that data ourselves, right? So even if there is a new version, it doesn't break a report. So that's like one thing. The data that live out here and like the mapping, a lot of these are straight from the authoritative source, and they're getting updated all the time. And that's great. You can turn on the layer and it was updated yesterday. Awesome. So those kind of have their own cycle, and every now and then they'll like change the service and I'll have to like hunt down the new, I'll be like, oh no, this is broken. I have to go find the new thing. So that's its own rodeo. And then for the report, for the big data layers that aren't, most of them don't change that much. But the ones that do, like RC map, I get an early release like of those data, and like very much in communication, and like I help review the data before they get out. So I kind of like early adopter, I guess, of some of that data. So we know it's coming. Mm-hmm. So if we know the LANDFIRE change is coming, we can track that more closely, because yeah, we always lag like up to a year behind, like what LANDFIRE is doing because of our update cycle. So we just released 2.1 in December. So we tend to have an annual-ish update cycle, but because of all of the horrific IT changes that we're having to make in our infrastructure and like our SSL certificate, like just like ton of security awfulness going on with this zero trust infrastructure, the update cycle is a little less predictable. And like the next one, I don't know if it's going to be a version 3 or a version 2.2 in July, because of there's like so many unknowns, but it's for sure annual, but sometimes we have sub releases less than an annual basis, like biannual, depending on what IT disaster happens.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, cool. I mean, if there's any way we can kind of help you catch up to our current version or whatever,
yeah,
I'd be happy to discuss.
Yeah. And yeah, so like we're doing here, and this makes it into the report, this figure. This is moving, this whole API is moving to the Eros server. So like if LANDFIRE, if you guys are interested in hosting the service that in whatever language, format, whatever, as long as it accepts a shape and returns the table of data in the structure, at least close enough to the structure that we need, that we could get it into this structure. If you guys are interested in hosting that, I mean, then we could just stay relevant, and then we wouldn't have duplication of your data and be behind however many versions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth having a discussion with the folks you're talking with at RC Map and like how they're handling it, because I'm sure we could learn from that. Definitely.